Nightwing, issue 133, legacy number 320. Dan Waters writing with V. Kenneth Marion on the art. So, Marion's a not bad artist, but I will admit, when I saw it wasn't Soy, I was like, oh no Dexter Soy. I'm upset by this.
Yeah.
So,
I might have yelled at my tablet, you're not Soy. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the last issue ended, of course, with everyone seeing at least partially this incident where Olivia's head came off, and they're all blaming Nightwing for it, or at least a lot of people are blaming Nightwing for it. So we have Maggie Sawyer coming to speak to Nightwing, who's by the bedside of Nightwing Prime, and she's saying, "Hey, I'm really supposed to be arresting you, but obviously I trust you, so I'm here to talk to you about stuff." And she brings up working in Metropolis and Gotham, and talks about how Nightwing's kind of in between Batman and Superman, and how that's kind of a problem for him in some ways, because with Superman he's always the beloved, the goody two shoes hero that everyone looks up to. Batman's always kind of feared, and that's the point of Batman. Whereas you can be either loved or feared, and it seems to flip in whatever suits the narrative of the time. So you kind of feel like you're getting turned into a scapegoat after you feel like you were being respected before. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting way of looking at Nightwing and his relationship with Bloodhaven.
Well, because I always look at that too as he is the first, second generation hero, right? So he pulls from Superman and Batman, right? So he gets their strengths, but now it also seems like, he's also getting the weaknesses, right? Because for as much as Superman's loved, Batman's feared, and now, depending on what's going on in Bloodhaven, that's Nightwing, So I did like that. I was like, I never thought of it like that. He kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah, it was an interesting way of looking at it. And, I think even Nightwing at one point says, it's when he's saying his goodbyes to his sister later on, and it sounds like he's about to do something really dangerous because he might not be coming back, because he hands her all of his money and says, hey, do something with this Pennyworth money. He says, get out of this godforsaken city and go somewhere good. And I'm like, oh, damn, that sounds quite... I feel like Dick wouldn't normally say something like that about Bloodhaven unless he's really feeling down. But obviously what's happened with Pierce, what's happened to Nightwing Prime, who's technically still a kid, and obviously these kids that are being taken, which is obviously something else Maggie Sawyer's there to tell him about. Obviously he's at his lowest point. We're at his kind of darkest before the dawn kind of moment. And even Babsy's appearance to come and try and cheer him up. And she's like, hey... You've been hated and been number one most wanted multiple times before. I checked, and it's never been the end of the world. At least, well, maybe in a literal sense, it might have become the end of the world because we were fighting Darkseid or something, but never in the way where it's ruined your life going forward. So, and I like that because that's almost like a meta thing of her saying, hey, this is not permanent. It's never going to be permanent. I know it feels really bad right now. I like that the character's acknowledging that, because it makes it feel less like we are supposed to read it as the audience as, oh, this is permanent. No, we know it's not permanent, and the characters are even acknowledging it's probably not permanent, but it still feels really shitty in the moment for him.
I just love her, the way that Babs is completely nonchalant with all of it, where she's like, all right, you do this, I'm gonna take the dog for a walk, you'll be back. She is not worried at all, because again, this is what they do, they save the day, and it's that confidence in what they do. And I just, her whole vibe here, when she goes to leave, and her, we'll get it done together, we'll save the day, I promise. And I'm just like, oh my god, this is an actual human partnership, right? This is what a healthy relationship actually feels like, right? And it's very good. And he's just a contrast with that, he's dour, which I never associate with Nightwing, right? He's the Batman who smiles. I remember that in I forget, I think it was a Scott Snyder, I think it was in Black Mirror, when the villains in Gotham realize that's not the same Batman because he is smiling. Because that's just his thing. He takes joy in what he does, and it feels like the Zani has stolen his joy.
Yeah, we get the payoff to Martian Manhunter sensing something, because we actually get a few pages from his perspective as he's watching Bloodhaven, and sort of sensing that children are seeing something that isn't there, they're disappearing to somewhere that isn't there, and how that doesn't make much sense, and how it's something from the fifth dimension. And he eventually comes to see Nightwing and talks to him about it. And he's like, hey, something's here, and he's like, yeah, it's something called the Zani.
That should not be.
And Jean kind of makes it clear that, like anything from the fifth dimension, it gets more powerful the more people are aware of it. So I can help you get to his like Cirque du Sin. I can help you go to him, but it kind of needs to be just you, because if we send in a team of heroes, then more people know about him, and then he gets more powerful. So it's kind of this weird way of making sure it's like a one-person thing for Nightwing to go deal with. So yeah, really neat. I think on that front, I like that element. So
yeah. Also, not me realizing that was Jean's eyes because of the bug characters that we've met, right? So when it's the overlay, when we first get that, you know, the thing that should not be has come to Bloodhaven. I'm like, why are they putting the bug people's eyes here? Right? And then it clicked once it was Jean. You know, it made me feel very foolish.
Yeah, and obviously Jean does say to him, like, if the Zani wants you to go to him, then you shouldn't. But Dick's like, hey, he's stealing children, and he's going to keep stealing more. So, like, there's kind of no choice here, regardless of how much of a bad idea it seems. So it does kind of feel like, hey, all hope is kind of lost. He's going to do this, like, seemingly, like, no return mission. Also, they point out that Nightmite's still like a jar of soup, just sitting there because of after what happened with the Titan's Tower.
Yeah, I like that when Dick introduces that to John, he goes, oh yeah, that's Nightmite. He's soup now. And he goes, interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know.
Yeah, honestly, the only thing about it that I don't really quite vibe with is just how Jean, like, gets him there. He just kind of says, oh, I'm going to take all of the dark corners of everyone's eyes, because that's where you see the Cirque du Sin, and make like a door. And I'm like, this doesn't seem like it's in Jean's power set. This feels like just random nonsense to me, but whatever.
No, I almost wish that he had done, like, I get the metaphysical aspect of it that Waters is going for, but I almost wish, like, this was a thing, like, Jean has to, is like, you got to think real hard about it. You got to think about the dark corners that exist when you're not looking at him, because that's where the Zani lives. Instead of creating this, like, meditation ball that opens into the sky, you know?
Yeah, it didn't feel like something that actually vibes with his powers at all, so it just kind of felt a little bit weird and forced as a way to quickly, like, have Nightwing go to the Cirque du Sin. I do appreciate that once he goes into the portal, though, it's very disorientating, and the colouring gets a lot more muted to make it feel like there's less life here. But he walks up and sees a child whose face is nothing but teeth. So if you like some nightmare fuel, that's something for you.
We are officially in the other realm, in the stuff of nightmares. Yeah, yep. Like you said, nightmare fuel.
And then Olivia shows up holding her own head and says that it's not technically her exactly, but it's like an image of her. It's what's left of her, the essence of her inside the Cirque du Sin. So yeah, she's like, hey, I'll take you to the Zani. He wants to play a game with you. And if you win, you get to take all the kids home. But if you don't, then they all come here. So stakes are pretty high, sets that up, and then the final tease as Jean is still kind of standing over the city, worried about Nightwing, but obviously hoping that he'll pull it off. He mentions the circus music that's sort of like silent is getting louder, as weird as that sounds, and we get a little tease at the end that Nightwing Prime's fingers are starting to move, and that's where we leave off. So I like this issue overall. I think all the scenes of Nightwing being a little out of character, which makes sense in the context of him being at his lowest moment. He's a little bit angrier, he's losing a bit of faith, and he's ready to go after the Zani. I like that stuff, and I like the things that it sets up, and I mostly like the Jean stuff. It's just the actual portal opening I'm not as keen on. But inherently, compared to the last couple of issues, it does feel a little bit like we have to like get him to the Cirque du Sin.
Yeah.
And the emotional breaking point kind of happened by the end of last issue. This issue, it's mostly just about how he gets there and kind of him, like, dotting some I's, crossing some T's before he goes with the various characters in his life. And those are all good scenes. But between that feeling a little bit less exciting and the art obviously not being as Dexter Soy, it's someone else, just not bad, but certainly not as great. I would say that this is definitely a little bit more low key in terms of like quality versus, you know, most of the issues of this run.
Yeah. I feel like I can see the seams a little bit here, right? Because they mention like it's the kids that can hear, right? And more kids are going missing, right? And now that Nightwing Prime is hearing the music in the soups there, I feel like what's gonna save Dick is the kid that believed in him, right? Is when he became Nightwing Prime. But it has to be in the kid form, so he could actually enter the Cirque du Soleil, because that's the one hero I feel that can bail him out, right? Is the kid, you know, that wants to be like Nightwing or whatever. But I feel like, for as much as I can see the seams, I feel like that feels fulfilling, and I don't know if that fits a horror story, right? Because that's essentially what this is, you know. So I do like there's an ominous presence here at the end where I don't necessarily know how Nightwing's going to get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about that. I'm fine with, like, because ultimately there's going to be like a save at the end, right? There has to be. It's a Nightwing story, but
right.
I think the atmosphere and the vibe and like this being a foreboding villain that pushes him to the brink. I think on all those realms it's working well, which I think is the most you can ask for in a comic book villain, really. So I have no, at least in a superhero comic book villain to be specific. So I have no issues with that. So yeah, but so we'll see kind of like the big showdown over the next couple issues, I bet, because we know March's issue is the start of like the new arc, so we know we've got January and February then sort of like doing the final parts of this particular story. So I'm excited to see what they're doing with those. So what are you giving Nightwing 133, Matt?
I'm gonna give it a 7.5.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm still even tempted to go to the 8, to be honest, but yeah, I'll still go 8 out of 10 on this. I still think there's enough there for me, but it definitely is a little bit of a step down just because they are, and then you know, one or two little things in the story to sort of get us to that next part. It's just not as elegant as it perhaps normally is with Waters.
Yeah.